Hello and welcome to my Unity 2D looking and shooting tutorial. To start off, what we want to do is go to the player and open the player script. You're going to do it through the player or through the assets folder. Once it's loaded, what we want to do is create a new public camera object called cam or camera or whatever we want to call it, player cam. We also want to create a public rigid body 2D, and I'm going to call it RB for rigid body. Then want to create a private vector2, and I'm going to call it mouse position. These are all the main things to get different measurements to make the player rotate as we move the mouse. What I want to do now is go underneath the update function, and I want to go type in the mouse position variable that we just created, and I want to make it equal to the camera dot screen to world point. I then want to put some brackets, and inside here I want to do input dot mouse position. This is what will get our cursor's position on the camera. What I want to do now is underneath the update function, I'm going to type in fixed update, and hit tab, and it should create the function called fixed update. Inside here we want to create a vector2, and we want it to be called look direction. I'm going to call it look direction. And we want this to be equal to the mouse position minus the rigid body variable we created, which I called mine RB, and we want it to be the rigid body position. Under this, we want to create a float. This float is going to be called angle. This will be equal to mathf dot atan, and we want it to put some brackets, and it's going to be the look direction dot x. And then we want this to be times by, not mouse position, we want it to be times mathf dot rad 2 degrees, and then we want it to be minus 90 as well. And then underneath all that we want to do rb dot rotation equal to angle. So what this function will do is it does the look direction. It works out the look direction, which is the mouse position minus the rigid body position, and then underneath that it gets the float angle, which will be the math function of atan, which is uses tangents and stuff, and it then uses the look direction's x value and times it by the maths rad 2 degrees minus 90, which is basically just a set number as you see there, and it does that minus 90. And then what we do is we get the rigid body we make the rigid body's rotation of the player equal to the angle function, which is the one above. What we can now do is we can save this and then go back to Unity, and if we click on the player, what we need to do is get the main camera in the hierarchy here and drag it all the way into the camera slot on the player script. We then want to do the same thing but the rigid body that's already on the player. So if we grab that, drag it up, and now they should both be set to a certain object. So if we hit play now, the player should sort of look towards the mouse. But yeah. Now what we want to do is we want to create a bullet game, or we want to create a fire point first. We want to create empty, and we're going to call it a fire point. And we want to add this to the player. We also want to move this to the top of the player. This makes it so we will use this to know where the player's going to shoot from. What we then want to do is create the actual bullet itself. So sprite, circle, and then we want to set it to 0.5. And then I'm going to name it bullet as well. And all we want to do is to add a rigid body 2D. And we want to set the gravity scale to 0. We also want to create a circle collider 2D. We then also want to make this a trigger as well, just to make sure. We want to go to the player and we want to create a new script on the player. We want this script to be called shooting. New script, create an add. What we're going to do is we go in the shooting script, and inside the update function we want to make an if statement. We want it to be if input dot get button down, and we want it to be the button of fire 1. Oh, you need to add another bracket over here because it doesn't put it in for us for some reason. And then inside here what we want to do is create a we want it to be shoot. Make sure it's shoot, not shooting. It should come up as an error at first, but what we could do is we can go underneath this update function and create this function ourselves. And we want it to be void shoot, like we put at the top, and then curly brackets, so that we have our shoot function here. What I'm then going to do is go to the top of the screen and create 3 different variables. I want the public transform of the fire point. I also want the public game object, and I want the bullet. I then want we'll then want to create a float for the bullet force or bullet speed, whatever you want to call it. And there we go. Now we have our 3 functions we need. I then want to go to the shoot, and I want to do bullet equals instantiate, and we want to create brackets. We want it to be the bullet, comma, and we want it to be the fire point dot position, and another comma, and then the fire point's rotation. So this is basically just to spawn in the bullet object, and it will have basically the same position and rotation of the fire point. I then want to go underneath this and create a rigid body 2D, and I'm going to call it RB again, and it will be equal to the bullet dot get component. We want these 2 little like crocodile arrow things, the more than less than signs, and we want it to be equal to the rigid body 2D component, and then put the 2 brackets at the end there. So this will use the bullet game object and get the rigid body component of the bullet game object. We then want to do the rigid body of the bullet, we want to add a force to it. This force will be in the direction of the fire point's up position, and we want to do that times the bullet force, and we want to then do we want the force mode 2D dot impulse like this, which this just gets the type of force we want, which is just a sudden like shot of force. There we go. Now what we could do is save this and go back into Unity, and if we go to the player and we go down to the script, we need to drag the fire point into the fire point slot. We also need to drag the bullet into the assets window so we can make it a prefab, which basically means it just means if we drag it out of here we can get infinite copies of it. I'm then going to delete all of them from the scene, and if we go back to the player's shooting script, we can drag the bullet prefab into the bullet slot. Now what we should be able to do, if we go in, we should now be able to shoot. What you should see is the bullets won't go anywhere, they'll just stick to the player. That's because what we need to do is go to the player and we need to set the bullet force on the script to whatever number you like. I'm going to set mine to 10, and now the player will now shoot. There we go. What we now want to do is to make it so that if the bullets like hit a wall or something, they will delete themselves. So what I'm going to do is go into the bullet prefab in the assets window, and I'm going to go add component, and I'm going to call it bullet. New script, create an add, and it should add it to the prefab. So every bullet that spawns in, if you do it in the assets window on the prefab already made, every bullet that now spawns in will have this bullet script on it. So if we open the bullet script and we go underneath the update function, I want to create an on trigger into 2D function, and it's going to be if collision dot tag is equal to wall, we'll then destroy the game object. And if we save this, we can go back to Unity. I'm now just going to create a random 2D object. It'll be a square, and it's going to be called wall. I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to scale it on the y-axis a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is go up to the tag section here where it says untagged, and I'm going to make it a wall thing. I'm going to show you how to you shouldn't have this wall tag already, so what you'll need to do is go to add tag, click the plus sign here, and create a tag called wall. And when you save it, it should appear here like mine has up there, and what you'll then have to do is go back to the wall thing here and then set it as wall, the wall tag. Now what should happen there is if you hit play and you shoot, never mind, I need to add a collider to the wall. Collider, box collider 2D. Now if you shoot it into the wall, it should now, there you go, delete. After making this tutorial, I realized I made a few errors. The first one is in the player script, in the fixed update function, the float angle should equal mathf.attand2, and it should also have look direction Y, because originally I think I had it as just look direction X and the atan function, but what it should look like is what I have here. The second change I made was in the bullet script here. Instead of just having it as destroy game object, it should be this game object, so it doesn't completely remove the shooting function entirely. So now, if you save those changes and go back to Unity and hit play, you should be able to shoot as much as you like, as fast as you can click basically, and the player will look exactly where the mouse is. And yeah, that should be the end of the tutorial, and those changes should fully fix the code. Thank you for watching.